This video is designed to talk to you about some animal cell organelles, particularly 5. Today we'll talk about the cell membrane, cytoplasm, nucleus, nuclear membrane, and mitochondria. Our learning target or objective is how do the structures in plant and animal cells relate to their functions? And today in particular, we'll talk about, again, those 5 different organelles. But looking at this picture, you can see that there are a lot more than just 5 animal cell organelles. Right now, I'd like you to make sure you have a notebook next to you while you view this lesson. If you currently have a notebook, fantastic. However, if you need to pause and go grab a notebook, please do so now. Throughout this lesson, I'll have this little notebook icon right here in the corner of my screen whenever I would recommend you pause the video and write down the information. It is important that you have notes about the 5 different organelles that I'll talk about today, because throughout this unit, we'll continue to add on more organelles and eventually talk about plant cells as well. So please make sure throughout this lesson you are writing things in your notebook and feel free to pause. Okay, so first things first, I'd like to talk to you about that term organelles. I've said it a few times already throughout this lesson. The word organelle is just a general term for everything inside of the cells. So right now, all of this right here on my screen, those are organelles. It's a specific structure found within a job that has found within a cell that has a specific job. So when you hear that term organelle, just know that it's just a general term for all of the parts of the cell. I am going to read a portion from the book today throughout this lesson because I'm not an expert on cells, and I think that the textbook does do a nice job of presenting some information to us. Okay, here we go. A typical cell. As scientists continue to study cells, they notice structures inside the cells. From observing many kinds of cells in thousands of organisms, biologists discovered that some structures are found in all or nearly all cells. These structures are so common that they are usually included in models or drawings of a typical cell. Every kind of cell, whether a bacterium or a cell from a giant oak tree, has a cell membrane. So let's pause and look for our cell membrane in our diagram here. Here I see the cell membrane, and the arrow is pointing to this outer area of the cell. This membrane separates the cell from its environment or surroundings. The cell membrane acts as a barrier to control what enters or leaves the cell. Everything that enters or leaves the cell must cross this membrane. The material enclosed by the cell membrane is called the cytoplasm. So pause. Let's see if we can find the cytoplasm. So here I see the cytoplasm, and it's pointing to all of the yellow stuff in this cell. So the word cytoplasm means cell material. In the cytoplasm, the cell uses substances from food for 2 purposes: to build new cell substances and structures, and to begin the first steps in the process of obtaining energy from cellular respiration. So right now in your notebook, I'd recommend that you write down the term cell membrane. Perhaps you even practice saying it out loud, even though it sounds kind of weird to do. It'll be important that you are comfortable saying these terms as well. The cell membrane controls what enters the cell. And you might even consider drawing a picture in your notes as well. Notice how it kind of just drew a circle and then labeled the outside as the cell membrane. You can see in this cartoon drawing that the cell membrane is actually pretty complicated. It's made up of lots of different parts, and it's a complicated substance to control what comes into the cell and what leaves the cell. But for our purposes, we just need to know that it's the outside layer of an animal cell. The other term we were introduced to in that reading is cytoplasm. The cytoplasm, I kind of have two definitions here. Choose which one makes more sense to you. So perhaps you'd like to write down that the cytoplasm is the location of many reactions that take place in the cell. Sometimes, though, that definition is a little confusing to sixth graders. Really, the cytoplasm is just the jelly-like material enclosed by the cell membrane. So it's all of this part here if you're doing a little bit of a drawing. Let's take a look at an actual cell. Now, this cell was viewed under a microscope because we can't view most cells with just our naked eye. And you can see the outside of the cell here is our cell membrane. Then I see all of the jelly-like material inside of this cell is our cytoplasm. Now you'll view one other portion that we haven't spoken to yet, but we're getting there, the nucleus. And it's this darker purple portion. Okay, let's keep reading. In 1831, Robert Brown identified a small dark center within many cells. He called this center the nucleus. The cells of both multicellular and unicellular organisms, multicellular means many and unicellular means one, except for bacteria, have a cell nucleus. The nucleus is a small compartment within the cell. It is separated from the rest of the cell by a nuclear membrane. The nucleus contains the majority of the genetic information, or DNA, of the cell and directs the cell activities, including growth and reproduction. So the nucleus stores the genetic material, or DNA, and directs the activities of the cell. If you're drawing a picture right now, it's often kind of depicted as being in the center of the cell. So here you can see my picture. I labeled the nucleus as the center circle then within the cell. If we take a look at another picture of a cell under a microscope, again, you'll see the cell membrane on the outside, the cytoplasm, all of that jelly-like material inside the cell, and then this darker portion here is our nucleus. In the reading, we were also introduced to another portion of the cell, another organelle, the nuclear membrane. The purpose of the nuclear membrane is to separate the nucleus from the cytoplasm. So in my drawing, here I have a picture of the nucleus, right? And then I pointed to the outside of the nucleus, the outer edge, and labeled that nuclear membrane. In this picture here, you can observe the same thing that I just showed you in my drawing. So this whole circle here, this whole dark portion is our nucleus, but the outer edge of that nucleus is called the nuclear membrane. On this diagram, you can also see the cell membrane and the cytoplasm as well. These cells are actually human cheek cells. So if you kind of would put a swab on the inside of your cheek and put it on a slide and look at it under a microscope, you would see something that looks similar to this. Most cells have tiny structures that help them do many jobs. These structures are called organelles, or little organs. We learned this already. They are often surrounded by their own special membranes. The nucleus is one example of an organelle. Some of the organelles can just barely be seen with a light microscope. Some of the jobs performed by these organelles are explained in the table on the following page. The organelles that release most of the energy from food are called mitochondria. Mitochondria use oxygen to complete the cellular respiration process. This process releases the energy stored in food for the cell's use. For this reason, mitochondria are sometimes called the cell's power plant. Different types of cells have different number of mitochondria, ranging from 1 to thousands. Cells that need a lot of energy, such as heart cells and muscle cells, have more mitochondria than cells with low energy requirements. Mitochondria are usually rod-shaped, but in some cells they can be round. So here we see a picture of a mitochondria or mitochondrion, this purple structure right here. So in your notebook, record mitochondria down. To me, they kind of look like a jelly bean with some squiggles in them. And that's normally how I draw them too. So you can see in my drawing right here, I kind of draw a jelly bean shape with some squiggles. And I'd like you to write down one of these definitions. So there are two on my slide. The first one reads, the site of reactions of aerobic respiration, which uses glucose obtained from food and oxygen to produce energy for the cells and tissues. And the important part of that, for our purposes, is the fact that mitochondria produce energy. They're also known as the power plant of the cell. Now, this word mitochondria is often really tricky for sixth graders to pronounce. So I would like you to practice saying that. So the word is mitochondria. Mitochondria. Here's a picture of what a mitochondria looks like in a cell under some pretty intense magnification. So again, kind of that jelly bean shape with those squiggles throughout it. We could also see on this slide that all of that blue stuff is our cytoplasm. If you haven't added a complete drawing to your notes right now, I might recommend that you do so. Here's what my drawing looks like, and I referenced this throughout my lesson as well. So you can see I drew a circle because animal cells are usually circular in shape. In the center of that, I drew my nucleus. I labeled the outside of my nucleus my nuclear membrane. I labeled the outside of my circle shape my cell membrane. All of the stuff in the middle here is the cytoplasm. So my cytoplasm arrow just kind of goes to the center area here. And then I drew my squiggly jelly bean, my mitochondria. Now I only drew one mitochondria, but most cells, or as we were reading, many cells have lots of these. So feel free to add more than one mitochondria to your drawing. In this lesson, we've learned about 5 different organelles. Think right now, could you label the 5 organelles in the drawing that I'm showing to you? Consider pausing this video and trying this. And when you unpause, you can reveal the answers. Hopefully you tried this out. You tried labeling these. So number 1 points to the nucleus. Number 1 is the nucleus. Number 2 points to a mitochondria. And you can see another mitochondria in this diagram as well. Number 3 points to the cell membrane, the outer layer of the cell. Number 4 points to the nuclear membrane. Notice how it's pointing to the outside of the nucleus. And number 5 points to the cytoplasm, all of that jelly-like material inside of our cell.